Good morning, Dan and Amy. Note the story that Alderman Deb Mell's office was robbed.
Yeah, at 3:25 this morning, police say a male suspect broke a glass of pane from the front door and went in and helped himself to some computer equipment.
Mm-hmm.
That's according to police. And there's surveillance tape, so sure that's why they knew it was a man, and I'm sure there'll be an arrest made soon.
Why was a Chicago alderman's office broken into? Well, to paraphrase Willie Sutton, famous bank robber, because that's where the money is, I'm sure.
Oh.
So last week we talked a little bit about the back and forth between certain elements of the Republican caucus over the Paul Ryan proposed Obamacare replacement legislation that is also White House proposed because they're flying in formation on this. And we had dueling op-eds last week, Ted Cruz and Mark Meadows, the conservative wing of the GOP congressional delegations in the Wall Street Journal. And we also had Robert Pittenger, who's a congressman, Republican from North Carolina, write an op-ed sort of in response to that, or dueling op-eds, if you will, invoking the WWRD formulation. What would Reagan do with respect to Obamacare repeal and replace and the form that it's taken? And Pittenger's argument essentially was that particularly because of the political landscape, having to deal with Democrat House Speaker Tip O'Neill, Ronald Reagan was the consummate deal maker. He was always moving the flag for his agenda, but he would take half a loaf when all he could get was half a loaf. The famous 1981 Reagan tax cuts were not as big as he wanted, but they were big enough to spur the 7 fat years and the unprecedented growth that occurred during the Reagan era.
That said, you know who Paul Ryan is meeting with today? Ezekiel Emanuel.
Yeah.
Is coming in.
Dr. Death.
To tell him what he wants out of his health care.
He wants death panels. That's what he wants. 75 and out. That's Zeke Emanuel's directive. But importantly, over the weekend, Republican Study Committee Chairman Mark Walker said he and 8 members of their steering committee have opted to support the plan as proposed by Ryan, even though that plan is still taking form, because Ryan has suggested, I think he's yielding to some pressure from more moderate elements in the Republican caucuses, including Susan Collins on the Senate side, that there do need to be changes to the health care replacement, the Obamacare replacement, to provide more assistance to people in their 50s and 60s. Ryan saying on Fox News Sunday that we believe we should have more assistance. It's one of the things we're looking at. So there's still some amendments to what has been proposed that will probably come to pass before more voting on the topic later this week. But I just thought the invocation of Reagan, what would Reagan do, by Congressman Pittenger from North Carolina, was an interesting one, just in terms of the difficult balancing of doing what you said you were going to do and advancing a conservative reform policy agenda, but not making the perfect the enemy of the good. And it really is a balancing act, and you can understand genuine differences of opinion on that balancing act. And for somebody who can tell us more about that, who was the executive director of the Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, in addition to a number of posts throughout his career on Capitol Hill and in cabinet-level positions, for example, as chief of staff to Secretary of Labor Elizabeth Dole from 89 to 91 in the George H.W. Bush administration. We're pleased to be joined by John Heubusch, who is now adding novelist to his resume. He's got a new book, The Shroud Conspiracy, a fictional book about the Shroud of Turin that is not meant as a treatise on theology or Christian doctrine, that immediate caveat in one sentence, so he doesn't want to be Da Vinci Code labeled, I'm sure. John Heubusch, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks very much.
I hope it sells as many copies as Dan Brown's. I'm sure it'll be better, as Dan Brown's works have. But let's start with a little bit of perspective, since you've got such a long one on Capitol Hill, the legislative process, and the political bubble that is the Beltway. Where do you kind of formulate the approach, and what advice and counsel would you give to members of Congress on how Paul Ryan is moving this Obamacare replacement package?
we're going to see many changes between now and the time we actually have a vote, and half of them you're going to know about because they'll be very publicly aired out in the form of amendments, and the other half you're going to learn about a couple of weeks after the bill is passed. It's just the way things are done. This is not going to be easy to get every vote that they need, and it's like any hugely important piece of legislation. They're going to have to get a lot of votes that they presently don't have. You were just talking about they maybe picked 8 off. They're going to have to pick off 2 here, 1 there. And everyone's going to have a little piece that they're going to need to go home with and say that they got this change. They don't like the whole bill, but they got that change, et cetera. So what we see today is not what we're going to see tomorrow. But for the average member of Congress, smartest thing to do if they really want to get the most out of this is to hold on tight and don't give up your vote. Don't tell them you're going to vote yes until you absolutely have to, and get as much as you possibly can before the bill is passed.
Well, do you think it behooves President Trump and Paul Ryan to be meeting with the architect of Obamacare? That's Zeke Emanuel. That meeting's going to happen this morning.
Yeah, I don't. This White House has logic that sometimes I don't really fully appreciate. I guess it's not the meeting that I would be having right at present. I think I'd be meeting with all the recalcitrant Republicans first, make sure I had all those votes in line. And if I needed some Democrats, I'd be heading to them next down the line.
You think that's partly an optics play to show how reasonable and open-minded they are, that they're willing to talk to who the left considers experts, even though they're ghouls, like Zeke Emanuel and Jonathan Gruber and the gang?
I guess that's the logic, but again, I don't, sometimes the logic of tweets and the logic of other things that seem to happen from this White House, they sometimes baffle the mind, but maybe they may know something the three of us don't. I kind of doubt it because a play like that, I don't, just as much as it's going to help have moderate votes look their way, it's going to have conservative votes look the other way. So, I don't see.
Yeah, I hear you. As a bit of a Reagan scholar, what do you think Reagan would say in terms of advice and counsel for this administration and the House and Senate Republican caucuses? Something that he really didn't get to enjoy, certainly not out of the gate. In terms of moving a conservative reform agenda, being a transformative period the way his presidency was?
Well, in one respect, they just need to start with message. They have to have a unified message from every corner of the administration. They've got to speak with one voice and not 5 different voices. It has to be a discipline of message. They have to stand for the same thing. It just really is a matter of lining up your troops and making sure that everyone's marching, in step with where you want to go. And so you can't afford in this process to have different messages heading in opposite directions or distractions and diversions. Again, it's just a discipline that Reagan would put in place from his White House that, in which he'd have, in his case, he had a minority leader. He didn't have the House of Representatives. He had about 25 or 26 less votes than a majority. On the Senate side, he had the majority, but, everybody just needed to, hold hands and hold tight. And then what they do is cut deals where they needed to, but, not so much so that it would destroy the overall vision of what they were after. It's really difficult to say how the Reagan folks would handle this particular piece of legislation in this healthcare battle because it's different legislation for different times. But they had challenges like this in the form of having to reform all of Social Security and having to save Social Security from near-term disaster, and they were able to do that, and it took a lot of really smart legislative tactics to get things through the House. So overall, what I'd say is this White House needs to pay a lot more attention to how they grapple with the vote complexion that they have in the House and the Senate and make a profession out of it. This is not something you can take lightly. You have to. You're not going to pass anything major like this without every vote that you possibly can need.
We're talking to John Heubusch. He's the former executive director of the Ronald Reagan Foundation and Library, also the author of the new book, The Shroud Conspiracy, which is a novel. And in addition to your long political career, Mr. Heubusch, you also had a successful business career, chief administrative officer of Gateway, a Fortune 500 company, with a private investment company as well as a COO. And I want to go back to Reagan, kind of combine your experiences, because one of the things that was advertised at the advent of the Trump administration is there's a comparison, the troika that's around Trump, like the troika that was around Reagan. Meese, Deaver, Baker around Reagan, Priebus, Bannon, Conway around Trump. What do you make of that parallel? Is there something to that, and is there a lesson to be learned from how Deaver, Baker, and Meese managed the president and the administration for the current triumvirate?
Well, first I say it's incredibly difficult to compare the two men, Trump and Reagan. You won't find more different personalities, more different styles. Radically different. I don't know that I could say that the people around the president have really formed themselves into the kind of troika as of yet that you found with Baker, Deaver, Meese. The thing about Baker, Deaver, and Meese, they had just remarkably different, but were incredibly well qualified. They were well qualified individuals who, especially someone like in the form of Ed Meese, who'd been chief of staff to the president when he was governor of California for 8 years, and so he brought with him that experience and know-how of knowing his president. Deaver could orchestrate the message on the outside. Baker was the internal disciplinarian. They each brought different strengths to their roles that were really remarkable to see. I have to take a bow to the intelligence and the ability of the folks that are with President Trump at present. They've all got their own strengths, but I think it's just very different times. They've got different personalities. I don't think that they've solidified as a team yet, where they're all pulling together. And where I think they're particularly different is I don't think they're pulling together with the president necessarily and as a unified team, and that makes all the difference in the world.
So when President Trump on the campaign trail compared himself to Ronald Reagan, did you wince? Were you wondering maybe he was just using that to try and catapult his own career?
Well, the similarities lie in the fact that he used the, Make America Great Again, which was a Reagan slogan from the 1980 campaign. I guess, similar one. There's a similar message where the two are actually alike. I make the case that I think that Trump he day by day takes one page after another out of the Reagan playbook. What was Ronald Reagan for? He was for less taxes, less regulation, smaller governments, and stronger defense. And at least thus far, in the first 50 to 60 days of the Trump presidency, we've seen a great deal of this message be all about less taxes, less regulation, smaller government, stronger defense. And, we've seen that in his budget, where he's cutting federal domestic spending substantially in order to support a stronger defense budget. That's very Reagan-esque. So, too, is his messages that he wants to cut back strongly on corporate and individual taxes. Same thing with respect to regulations. He wants to cut 2 regs for every one that he passes. So he's got the Reagan vision, whether his folks want to believe that or not. So in that respect, I think Reagan might take a take a positive look towards his agenda. And the hope is that he's actually able to formulate legislation that gets these things through, and we'll just have to see if that comes to pass.
So, of course, before we let you go, let's talk a little bit about your book, The Shroud Conspiracy. It's, again, fiction. It's a novel. Are you entering your Bill Buckley, Blackford Oaks phase now?
I don't know about that. I absolutely love my position at the Reagan Foundation. It's one of the finest jobs I've ever had the chance to hold. And but in my spare time, I've written a sequel to The Shroud Conspiracy, and that'll be coming out next year. And it's just I'm real happy to see the first book, The Shroud Conspiracy, do as well as it's doing. It's climbed up the charts on Amazon, and that's great to see. It is really a page turner, and I hope people take it to the beach with them this summer and really enjoy it.
Has Tom Hanks agreed to play the protagonist yet?
Not just yet, but I do have a few friends in Hollywood that are vying for the position of the protagonist, Dr. Bondurant, who's a very highly intelligent and also atheist forensic anthropologist whose job is to go try to prove that the shroud is a fake. And he comes to find in this book that it's not as easy as he thought.
All right. He is John Heubusch. He's the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Foundation and author of the new book, The Shroud Conspiracy. John, thanks so much for joining us. Good luck with the book.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.